I live on a peaceful little farm, not too far from town, but just far enough that the air is quiet and clean. I've got space. Lots of it. Green fields, some old trees, a wooden fence that creaks when the wind picks up. It's the kind of place where mornings start with birds singing and cows softly mooing in the distance. The cows are my pride. They're not just animals. They're part of my routine, part of my life. I feed them. I talk to them. I know their moods, their sounds. They're calm, sweet creatures, and they never cause any trouble. Most of the time, they just chew their grass and watch the world go by. Honestly, it's a peaceful life. But peace doesn't last forever. Not when you live in a neighborhood with a homeowners association. The HOA. 3 little letters that can ruin your whole day. Now, don't get me wrong. Rules are fine. They keep things in order. But sometimes people use rules like weapons. And that's exactly what Karen did. Karen, just the name makes me roll my eyes. She lives a few houses down. The kind of person who acts like she owns the entire block. Always peeking over fences. Always finding something to complain about. My grass was too long. My fence was too rustic. She once reported me because my scarecrow looked too scary. But the real trouble started when she became the head of the HOA board. After that, it was like living under a microscope. She sent me letters, notes taped to my mailbox. Once, she even left a note on one of my cows. I'm not kidding. Taped it right to Daisy's side. Poor thing just stood there confused. She hated the cows. Said they smelled. Said they were eyesores. Who calls a cow an eyesore? I didn't argue. I smiled. I waved. I let her talk. That's how I've always handled people like Karen. Don't engage. Don't feed the fire. But then something strange happened. It started on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just finished fixing a part of the fence near the creek. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. I looked over toward the side of my property and saw a couple of unfamiliar people walking around. They had measuring tape and clipboards. I walked over, thinking maybe they were from a utility company. But when I asked what they were doing, one of them just smiled and said, "Oh, we're just checking the space for the setup." Setup? What's setup? They didn't explain. Just packed up and left. The next morning, I noticed white chairs stacked near the back of my yard. Not mine. Then a few metal poles. A tent frame. Tables. Flower buckets. All of it on my land. I stood there confused. I thought maybe someone made a mistake. Maybe the delivery was meant for the park across the road. That's when Karen showed up, in her perfect little dress suit, holding a clipboard like it was a badge of authority. She smiled that tight, fake smile of hers and said, "Hope you don't mind. My niece is getting married, and we needed a nice space. The park was full, and your yard just has that country charm." I stared at her, trying to understand what she just said. She wasn't asking. She was telling, like she thought she had the right. I said, "You're setting up a wedding in my yard." She nodded like it was no big deal. It's part of the neighborhood, technically. The association has access to shared spaces, and since you haven't fenced this section completely, we figured it was fine. Now, let me be clear. This wasn't a community park. It was my land. I bought it. I paid for it. Taxes, title, everything. The only thing missing was a corner of the fence that got knocked down in a storm a few weeks back. But just because it wasn't fenced didn't make it public property. I told her that. I tried to stay calm, but my voice was firm. This isn't a shared space. This is my property. No one asked me, and I didn't give permission. She gave a little shrug and waved her hand like it didn't matter. "Oh, it's just one afternoon. You won't even notice. We'll clean up after, I promise." Then she turned and walked away before I could say anything else. I stood there for a moment, stunned. Did that really just happen? Was this woman really throwing a wedding in my backyard? Without even asking? It felt like a slap in the face. And it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, more people came. More stuff appeared. Speakers, lights, tablecloths. Someone even tried to string fairy lights between my trees. It was like watching a circus set up, and I wasn't invited. No one even looked at me. No one knocked on my door. It was like I didn't exist. I couldn't believe it. I kept waiting for someone, anyone, to realize how wrong this was. I thought maybe one of the other neighbors would step in, but most of them kept quiet. Karen had her claws in everything, and people were scared to speak up. I wasn't scared. I was angry, not the shouting kind of angry, the cold kind, the kind that sits in your chest and simmers. Because this wasn't just about chairs and flowers. This was about respect, about being treated like your space, your home, doesn't matter, like you're invisible. I watched the preparations from my porch, sipping coffee, the cows lazily chewing behind me. They didn't care. They were used to strange things. But I could tell they sensed something was off. They stayed close to the fence, eyes following every person that passed. And that's when the idea first started to form. It came slowly, like a quiet little whisper in the back of my mind. At first, I brushed it off. No, that would be too much. Too dramatic. Too petty. But then I looked at Daisy, and she looked at me, and I swear I saw something in her eyes. A spark, like she was in on it. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. If Karen wanted a wedding in my yard, then my yard was going to be part of the wedding. All of it, even the cows. The day before the wedding felt like someone had dropped a party tent onto a postcard. My quiet field was no longer mine. It had been taken over. White chairs lined up in perfect rows, satin ribbons tied to every tree, and a huge canopy standing right in the middle of the grass where my cows usually grazed. People buzzed around like worker bees, hanging lights, testing speakers, arranging flowers in glass jars that looked way too fancy for a farm. Everything felt out of place. It was like a scene from a wedding magazine. Only I hadn't subscribed to it. I just watched from my porch, arms crossed, coffee going cold in my hands. Karen was in full command mode, barking orders, checking her list, adjusting centerpieces like she was hosting a royal event. She looked right at home, like this was her space, like she belonged there more than I did. She didn't even glance my way. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, silent, but my silence wasn't surrender. It was the kind that comes before something loud. The kind that means I was thinking, planning. I had a front row seat to my own yard being used like a rental hall, and not a single person thought to speak to me like a human being. That kind of thing, it gets under your skin. By late afternoon, music started playing from the speakers they'd set up. Not loud, but just enough to echo over the field. I recognized the song, something romantic, slow, probably a test run for the bride's entrance. It might have been beautiful if it didn't feel like an invasion. At one point, a teenage girl in a sparkly dress tripped over my old watering can and scowled like it didn't belong there. A man in a black suit came by and told one of the workers to move my rusty wheelbarrow out of the photo area. I watched them struggle to lift it, and I'll admit, I didn't mind seeing them get their nice clothes dirty. They wanted a perfect country wedding. They wanted charm without the inconvenience. They wanted my land, but not my life, not the real parts of it, the parts that weren't curated and cute. And I was tired of being treated like an obstacle in my own home. That night, the field glowed with string lights. I could see it from my bedroom window. Tables set, plates gleaming, wine glasses lined up in perfect rows. It was beautiful, sure, but it wasn't right. I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed, listening to the soft, distant thump of last-minute setup, the quiet laughter of guests arriving early, the sound of something that didn't belong. It didn't sound like home anymore. It sounded like a place where I wasn't welcome. Morning came with a soft mist rolling in over the fields. My cows were already up, grazing near the fence line. They seemed calm, peaceful, unaware of what was coming. I walked out to the porch, sipping coffee, same as every morning, but with a different kind of energy. It was the wedding day. I looked out at the setup. Fresh flowers everywhere, a little white arch at the end of the aisle, a long table covered in soft linens and pastries that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. And there, right in the center, was Karen, dressed in a blue satin dress, clipboard still in hand. Even on the wedding day, she had to be in control. She paced, checked every detail, and barked at a poor guy trying to fix a crooked sign. I swear she was sweating harder than the groom. Not that I knew who he was. I'd never seen the couple. Not once. They were complete strangers, about to say their vows in a place they'd never earned. And then it happened. Guests started arriving. Dozens of them. Fancy cars lined up down the road. People stepping out in suits and dresses, heels clicking against the gravel. They laughed, smiled, posed for selfies in front of the barn like it was a set. Like my life was their Instagram backdrop. No one looked at me. No one said hello. It was like I didn't exist. The music started again. Soft piano played through a speaker near the aisle. People took their seats, chatting quietly, adjusting their ties. Someone passed out little white programs with gold lettering. A little girl scattered flower petals from a basket. Karen stood by the arch, beaming. Her moment had arrived. I stayed by the porch, watching, still silent, still calm. But my heart was racing, not from nerves, but from something deeper, something righteous. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to call the cops. That would make me look like the bad guy. No, I had something better in mind. I walked down toward the barn, slowly. My boots crunched in the grass. My cows perked up when they saw me. Daisy came right over, nuzzling my hand. I scratched behind her ears and smiled. "You ready, girl?" I whispered. "Let's go give them a proper country welcome." I swung the gate open. The cows hesitated at first, blinking at the sight of so many people in bright colors. But then, one by one, they began to wander out. Slowly, curiously, heads down, sniffing the air, they followed the scent of fresh flowers, of pastries and bread rolls and fruit punch. I didn't guide them. I just walked alongside, calm as the morning breeze. And then it happened. The first gasp came from the back row of chairs. A woman in a wide hat stood up, eyes wide. "Oh my God," she whispered. A little boy squealed in delight. "Cows!" People started standing. Some laughed. Some looked horrified. One woman screamed as Daisy stepped between two chairs and began munching on the roses tied to the aisle. Another cow walked straight up to the dessert table and knocked over a plate of cupcakes with her nose. Frosting smeared across her snout like war paint. Someone tried to shoo her away, but she just blinked slowly and chewed. Karen was at the front, frozen in place. Her mouth was open. She looked like she couldn't breathe. Her dream wedding was being mooed all over. I stayed at the edge of the chaos, arms folded, watching. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The cows were doing all the talking. One walked under the arch and plopped down right where the bride was supposed to stand. Another licked the microphone. Someone tried to take a selfie with one of them, but the cow turned and knocked their phone into the grass. The groom finally arrived, confused, trying to figure out what was happening. The bride stepped out of the car and just stood there, eyes wide, staring at the scene. Cows everywhere. Guests in a panic. Chairs knocked over. Cupcakes ruined. Flowers destroyed. Karen turned to me, red in the face, stomping toward where I stood. "What is this? What are you doing? Get them out of here." I looked her dead in the eye and said, calm as can be, "They live here. You don't." She sputtered, hands flailing, demanding I do something. I just raised an eyebrow. "Didn't think you needed permission, remember?" She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. She had no words, just fury, rage without power. It was glorious. The wedding didn't start on time. In fact, it barely started at all. Guests left early. Some stayed and laughed. A few even asked to pet the cows. One guy gave Daisy a pat and said, "Best wedding I've ever been to." The day unfolded like a comedy, a tragedy, and a payback, all rolled into one. And through it all, I stayed quiet, just watching, letting the land speak for itself, I stood there for a long moment, watching Karen's face turn every shade of red you could imagine. She didn't yell this time. She was beyond yelling. Her mouth just opened and closed like she was trying to form words, but none would come out. Behind her, the scene was, well, let's call it creative chaos. Daisy, bless her heart, had wandered into the middle of the dance floor, if you could still call it that. She had frosting on her nose, a bit of lace ribbon stuck to her tail, and she was now licking one of the discarded gift bags. Another cow was sniffing around buffet table, while a third had knocked over a decorative sign that said, "Happily Ever After." I leaned against a fence post and crossed my arms, the corner of my mouth twitching up into a smile. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not really. It was about making a point, about showing that I wasn't invisible, that my land wasn't some blank canvas for Karen's little fantasy world. I tried to speak up before, and no one had listened. But cows? People notice cows. Karen finally spun around and barked at the caterers, flapping her arms, trying to get them to move the animals. But the caterers just looked confused. One of them shrugged and said, "We don't do livestock." I nearly laughed. A guest in a dark blue suit was trying to pick his way between two cows without stepping in anything unpleasant. He didn't succeed. His fancy leather shoes met a fresh pile with a soft squish. He made a noise like he'd been personally betrayed by the universe. A young woman tried to guide a cow away from the drinks table by waving a napkin like a matador. The cow just blinked at her, unimpressed, then went back to chewing on something that had once been a wedding bouquet. At some point, the bride tried to walk in. I'll give her credit. She held herself together better than most. But when she saw a cow standing in front of the arch where she was supposed to say her vows, she stopped, sighed, and muttered something that sounded a lot like, "Why didn't we just book a barn?" Karen rushed over to her, trying to smooth things over. Her voice had gone from bossy to desperate. "Don't worry, sweetie. It's just a little hiccup. I'll handle it." But it wasn't just a hiccup. It was a full-on stampede of reality, crashing into Karen's carefully planned illusion. The guests were torn between horror and laughter. Some stood around helplessly. Others pulled out their phones and started recording. One guy was narrating the whole thing like a documentary. Here we see the bride, caught in the wild, attempting to approach the ceremonial field. But alas, the cow has claimed it. I saw at least 3 people giggling behind their hands while trying to act like they were offended. One of the groomsmen came over to me, still holding his champagne glass. "So are they trained to do this?" I shook my head. "Nope, they're just being themselves." He sipped his drink and looked around. "Honestly, this is better than the last wedding I went to." The bride and groom eventually retreated to the far edge of the yard, clearly overwhelmed. Someone tried to rearrange the ceremony spot away from the cows, but by that point, it didn't matter. The moment had passed. The fairy tale had cracked. I turned and started walking slowly along the fence line, calling softly to the cows. Just a gentle sound, nothing sharp. I didn't want to scare them. They followed me, more out of curiosity than obedience. They had their fun, and I figured they'd had enough excitement for one morning. But not before Daisy made one last stop at the guest book table. She sniffed at the feather pen, then knocked over the sign that said, "Leave a note for the happy couple." A fitting end to her little adventure. As I guided them back through the open gate, I could feel every eye on me, half in shock, half in awe, like I was some kind of legend in boots. Karen just stood there frozen, hands trembling, lips moving but no words coming out. I leaned down to lock the gate again, and gave Daisy one final pat on the side. "You did good, girl," I whispered. When I turned back around, Karen was marching toward me. "You've ruined everything," she shouted, voice trembling. I didn't move. Did I? Yes. This was supposed to be perfect. My niece's big day. And you let farm animals loose in the middle of it. I looked at her, really looked, and it hit me. She genuinely believed she had done nothing wrong, that she had the right to take someone's land, someone's space, and turn it into her own vision, just because it suited her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You hosted a wedding on my land without asking. I said calmly. Didn't even knock on my door. Didn't even treat me like a neighbor. You treated me like a prop. It was just one day, she snapped. I took a step closer. Exactly. One day. And you couldn't even be decent about it. She opened her mouth to respond, but then her niece called her name. The bride sounded tired, maybe even embarrassed. Karen hesitated, then turned and walked away without another word. The guests started drifting off not long after. Some left in a hurry, clearly trying to avoid the mess. Others stayed and chatted like nothing had happened, treating the whole thing like a strange story they'd tell at dinner parties. One man stopped by the fence and looked at me. He said, "I think this might go viral." I just gave him a nod. "Let me know if it does." By mid-afternoon, the yard was mostly clear again. The decorations were gone. The music had stopped, and the cows were back in their pasture like nothing had ever happened. But something had happened. Something that wouldn't be forgotten. That land was mine. My life, my home, my peace. They'd tried to take it over. Paint over with their perfect colors and clean lines. But the cows brought it back to reality. Honest, messy, noisy reality. And I think, deep down, even the guests understood that. As the sun began to dip, casting golden light over the field again, I sat back on the porch with a fresh cup of coffee. Daisy wandered nearby, content, a little flower petal still stuck behind her ear. It had been a strange day, but strangely satisfying. The yard was finally quiet. All the folding chairs were gone. The crumpled napkins and scattered petals had been picked up. No more string lights hanging from the trees. Just the usual chirping birds and the slow, steady sound of wind moving through the tall grass. My kind of peace. The cows were calm again, grazing near the back fence like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Daisy stayed close to the gate, still wearing that little tangle of ribbon on her horn. She looked proud of herself. Maybe she was. I sat on the porch, same spot I always did, watching the field and sipping a warm cup of tea this time. I'd had enough coffee for 1 week. My boots were still muddy from earlier, but I didn't bother changing. I was comfortable, and more than that, I felt like myself again, like I'd taken something back. It's strange how one event, just a single day, can flip your whole world upside down and right side up again at the same time. My phone buzzed beside me on the railing. I picked it up and saw a message from a neighbor down the road. It said, "Saw the footage online. I'm howling. You're a legend." I hadn't posted anything myself, hadn't said a word publicly, but the internet, well, it had its own way of spreading stories. Apparently, one of the guests had uploaded a video, just a few minutes long. It showed Daisy walking across the aisle, knocking over the wedding arch, with Karen screaming in the background. The title? Wedding Crash by Cows, Epic HOA Karma. It had already hit a couple 100,000 views. I don't usually care about stuff like that, but I'll admit, I smiled. A big, real smile. Sometimes people need to see something like that. Something honest. Something that cuts through all the fakeness and glitter and reminds everyone that land is spirit. That a home isn't just property on a map. It's something you care for, something you live in and grow with. And you don't just borrow it without asking. I'd spent years in this place, built a life here, learned every slope of the land, every tree, every stubborn fence post that didn't like to stay straight. I'd worked in the rain, in the snow, in the heat that made your skin stick to your shirt. And now, for once, the world had seen what happens when someone disrespects that. Another message came in. This one from someone I didn't even know. "Hi. I know this is weird, but I want to say thank you. That video of your cows made my whole day. I've been dealing with some tough stuff lately, and watching Karen panic while your animals did their thing, it made me laugh the first time in weeks." I read it twice. That one hit different. It made all the frustration and awkwardness worth it, because this hadn't just been about one pushy neighbor or a hijack yard. It was about something deeper. Something a lot of people feel, but don't always know how to say. People are tired of being stepped on, tired of being ignored, tired of being treated like a backdrop to someone else's spotlight. I got up and walked slowly to the barn, patting Daisy on the way. She blinked up at me with those big, soft eyes. She had no idea she'd gone viral. No clue that half the internet was calling her a queen. To her, it was just another day of exploring. I filled their troughs with fresh water and dropped some hay into the feeder. The familiar smells, the routine, it grounded me. The world could laugh, cheer, or argue about what happened, but life here didn't change much. Inside the barn, I found an old wooden sign I hadn't seen in a while. It was leaning behind a stack of feed bags. Faded, dusty, but still legible. It read, Respect the land and the land will take care of you. I couldn't even remember who made it. Maybe my grandfather. Maybe me years ago. But the words still rang true. They always would. Later that evening, a car pulled up the driveway. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows. I recognized it right away. Karen. I didn't move. She stepped out, still wearing her wedding day outfit, though the hem of her dress looked a little worse for wear. She didn't carry her clipboard this time. She walked up with slow, careful steps, holding something in her hands. A box, maybe. She stopped a few feet away from the porch. I came to apologize, she said. I said nothing. Just waited. I didn't mean to disrespect you, she added. I just got caught up in everything. The planning, the details. I thought it would be easier to just go ahead. I didn't think it would matter. I raised an eyebrow. Did it matter? She looked down, then nodded. Yeah, it did. She held out the box. I took it slowly. Inside were a few leftover pastries, some mini sandwiches, and a slice of wedding cake, all neatly packed. I thought, maybe your cows would like these, she said. I looked her in the eye, searching for sarcasm, but didn't find any. Not sure cake's great for cows, I replied. A nervous laugh escaped her lips. Guess not. She shifted awkwardly. Anyway, just wanted to say sorry. For real. I nodded slowly. Not because it fixed everything, but because it was something. And sometimes that's enough. She turned and walked back to her car without asking for anything else. No forgiveness. No favor. Just left the box and drove off. Back inside, I set the cake aside, Daisy wasn't getting that, and poured myself another cup of tea. I scrolled through my phone again and found dozens of new messages. Comments, reactions, even a few local news outlets reaching out. Apparently, people couldn't get enough of the cow wedding crash. A comment caught my eye. This is what real justice looks like. No shouting. No lawsuits. Just cows. Another said, this woman is my hero. HOA Karen beware. I chuckled to myself and put the phone down. Outside, the sun dipped lower behind the trees, casting long shadows over the field. The air had that golden end-of-day stillness to it, the kind you don't find in cities or malls or wedding halls. Just here, just home, a cow lowed in the distance, deep and slow. I looked out and saw Daisy lying near the fence, legs tucked under her, head resting peacefully. She looked completely content. And me? I felt something close to that too. Not because I'd embarrassed Karen. Not because the video blew up online. But because I'd stood my ground. Quietly, firmly, with dignity. And a little help from a few good cows. This place, it may not be much to some people. It may not have chandeliers or crystal centerpieces, but it's honest, and in a world full of noise, there's something powerful about that. People might forget the wedding. They might forget Karen screaming. They might even forget Daisy's frosting-covered nose. But they won't forget what it stood for, and neither will I.